So hello friends, and welcome to the first Littorally Alive, a reading series dedicated to sharing the work of writers published by Littoral books. My name is Marieke van der Steenhoven. I'm a librarian and a friend of Littoral books, and I am delighted and honored to be your host this evening. Our program tonight will consist of prose and poetry from four fabulous authors: Meghan Sterling, Katherine Hagopianberry, Joshua Bodwell, and Jefferson Novicki. Littoral Books is an independent press based in Portland, Maine, committed to publishing beautiful books in a variety of genres by writers and artists from Maine and New England. Founded in 1975 by members of the Portland Women's Group for the express purpose of publishing the work of women writers, Littoral Books was one of the founding presses of the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance. The press went into hibernation in 1976, but 42 years later, in 2018, it renewed publication with Agnes Buchel's novel, The House on Perry Street. Its sixth and most recent book is by Katherine Hagopianberry's poetry collection, Mast. In September of this year, Littoral Books will publish Kate Kennedy's memoir, Skin. Before we begin our scheduled program tonight, I want to acknowledge this powerful and complex moment that we are in. We're gathered together in this digital space because of the pandemic, and I am grateful that we are here collectively engaging with the literary arts. Community and art are crucial in these times of physical distancing. But this moment is also filled with worldwide protests that have been sparked by the brutal murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, and countless others at the hands of the police. 400 years of systemic racism, violence, and oppression in this country calls us to action as citizens. In the chat, we're sharing a link to the Maine Racial Justice resource page. It's been put together by the incomparable folks at Black Lives Matter Portland. And after our program this evening, I encourage you to take the time to read and educate yourself, to donate if you can, and to share these resources with your community. It's against this backdrop that we're here tonight in celebration of local literature. I believe prose and poetry play a critical role in eliciting change and imagining new worlds, and I am so glad that you've joined us here to listen and engage with our authors. So as I mentioned at the top of the hour, this is the first event in a series. Littorally Alive will be presented weekly on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. and will highlight a writer or writers from the canon of Littoral books. Please check out the Littorally Alive website, the link is in the chat, and join the Littoral Books mailing list to stay up to date on our reader lineup. In the coming weeks, we'll be featuring a Balancing Act 2 slam, Maine Voices in North by Northeast, a Dangerous New World slam, and an evening dedicated to Mast, the latest book of poetry by Katherine Hagopianberry, one of our readers this evening. So to give you an overview of the format, we have four readers who will be presenting their work, and that will be followed by a Q&A. Our program is scheduled to run about an hour. We, again, will be asking all of the questions of the authors at the end of the reading, but you should feel empowered and emboldened to drop questions into the chat box throughout the evening. If you don't have access to that on your screen right now, there is a toolbar at the bottom where you can enable the chat, and please drop your questions in there throughout. Our producer will be monitoring and keeping track of these questions and will be feeding them to me to relay to the authors during that period. Some other housekeeping notes that I had previously mentioned is that we're asking you to, if you're excuse me, in our audience this evening, to turn off your video and to please remain muted. This allows there to be minimal feedback and also lessens the consumption of broadband, which allows us to stream to you in this magnificent 3D, not 3D, HD, whatever, will come in clearer. Okay, let's get down to business. Our first reader this evening is Meghan Sterling. Meghan lives in Portland, Maine with her family, Matthew, Adeline, and little B. And I imagine that it was either Adeline or little B that did the artwork that Meghan just shared for those of you who were here a little bit earlier. Meghan is the co-editor of the anthology, A Dangerous New World, Main Voices on the Climate Crisis, published by Littoral Books. Her work has been published in Rattle, Balancing Act 2, Glass, A Journal of Poetry, Driftwood Press, Sky Island Journal, Literary Mama, and many others. Her chapbook, How We Drift, was published by Blue Lyra Press. She is a poetry reader for the Maine Review, a Dibner Fellow at the 2020 Black Fly Writers Retreat, and a Hewenoaks Colony resident for 2019 and 2021. And it is a distinct pleasure to welcome you, Meghan.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. It's good to see you all, or know that you're there. The last few months, I've been, like many of us, relying heavily on poetry to guide me through trouble and come to some sort of understanding. And so that tends to be why I write, is because something's troubling me, whether it's great joy or sorrow. So I'm going to share with you tonight my poems from Balancing Act 2, and I'm just going to begin. What emerges? Autumn has arrived, and its mute foreboding, as if we, wise as horses, could sense the coming quiet and grow wild with alarm. Everyone is weeping. The neighbors scurry from their cars to their kitchens to boil their tears in their teapots. The sun dreams of justice, shrouded in her weavings, and there's blood in the veins of all the leaves, the way they keep falling in circles to lie at the base of the houses. All the angles have begun to emerge. Chimney stone, forgotten bird bath, the corner of an old receipt peeking from beneath a pile of ash. The sky ices over and claims its impotence, culling the rose bush before its buds even have time to blossom and shatter. This next one is Still Life with Snow. It fell away, that slant of light that followed us across the North Sea, across a stable yard, hoof marks sunk into the frozen mud. The way the barn cut the night in two, the hay steaming, the chickens soft in the roost. I had dreamt us before we ever came to be, clutching the cold like a talisman against the bruising of old dreams, against the inevitable age that would grip us in its fulsome mouth, a dog in the stable yard mawing its one mean bone. And what sky was left was hollowed moon and piecemeal as a memory of what I thought I could be if only love would find me, traveling the Arctic of my heart, gnawing at its white bone. And then I have poems about my daughter. At the end is always some sort of redemption, and for me it's been my daughter. Adeline. In our house, we always have dusty window frames, glass jars of tea, loose scree on the walkway. Lately, too, small evidences of her, sounds of sleep, quiet breathing soft as moss on stone, the dim roar of the monitor, a small sock wedged beneath a door. Agony of any distance, her life mattering more than much. Even in the next room, I dream of her behind my eyes, my belly still holding memory, the sky stripped of cloud, her perfect breath always in earshot, a weather vane. No matter, she. Insistent, a dripping tap, running in a rust line down to a drain. In our house, she is near as she was ever in my cells, in the wood grain of floorboards, cradle of smooth gray walls. And for the last poem I'm going to read, this is a poem where I was guiding myself through a sense of loss, which some of us who are mothers, I think, even fathers, fur babies or children will understand. It's called weaning. No longer cleaving, your shape in black and white in the infrared light, the monitor box set on the coffee table as I try to busy myself, as I try to remember who I was before you were me. Accustomed to your soft scent each night, your body alongside mine, so small as to be only an arm's length, your hair just washed in our bath, my vigil of putting us both to sleep in each other's arms. I'm told that this should be a small grief, so small, like your tender body, the weight of you scented with powder, grinning into my mouth, your tears in my mouth, exclaiming the nearness of my breast in your half-sleep, grasping it with both hands. It was your sweat on my hands, your snot on my chest, your mouth opening wide to engulf me. That is the way I used to feel about love, which you've revived in me. Thank you.
Sorry, some technical difficulties there, unmuting myself, but it was also perhaps a space of reflection. Thank you so much, Meghan. That was beautiful. If you've recently joined us, my name is Marieke, and this is Littorally Alive, a reading series presented by Littoral Books. We've just heard from Meghan Sterling, who is the co-editor of A Dangerous New World and whose work is included in Balancing Act 2, some of which we just heard from. Those are two beautiful productions by Littoral Books, and we've dropped the link in the chat to access Meghan's website as well as to, purchase a copy of Balancing Act 2 if it's not already on your coffee table, nightstand, or bookshelf. Again, we'll be doing a brief Q&A session at the end of the readings, but please feel free to drop your questions for Meghan into the chat at any point during the program. So next up, I am delighted to introduce Katherine Hagopianberry, who lives and writes in Bridgeton, Maine. Katherine has appeared in the Cafe Review, Deep Water, A Dangerous New World, Maine Voices on the Climate Crisis, Balancing Act 2, an anthology of poetry by 50 Maine women, and Glass, Poets Resist, among other places. And she has been a finalist and showcase performer at the Belfast Poetry Festival. Her first collection of poetry, Mast, is available from Littoral Books. I had the distinct pleasure of spending an afternoon drinking coffee and eating cookies with Katherine while interviewing her about her poetry and her process and inspiration. It was a truly wonderful time, and an abridged version of that interview appears in the back of her book, Mast. So hi, Katherine, welcome.
Hi, Marieke, thank you. I was so terrified to be interviewed, and of course, I walked into Marieke's house and found, a friend I had always known and had just met. It was magical, as so many things relating to poetry are. One of the things that I think is so tremendous about what poetry can do and what poetry can accomplish is it can transcend the moment and the aegis under which it was written and speak to us in completely new ways as our world shifts beneath us. And I wanted to start with a poem like that from last year, one that I wrote having absolutely no understanding of what this March, April, May, and June would look like. I wrote it in March of last year when my life seemed filled with a dozen terribly important at the time and now in the context of today, completely minor tragedies. But the weird part about the poem that it birthed is that it still, I think, has some force. And it takes as its governing metaphor something you will always encounter in springtime in New England, especially in Maine, which is our friend, the highway frost heave, which occurs, if you've never encountered one, oh, you have missed out, because snow will melt, water will gather under the highway. Thanks to our beautiful Maine springtimes, this will immediately refreeze. explode up under the highway, water expands when it freezes, crack everything in sight, and then promptly, at the next thaw, remelt and disappear. And what it leaves are sort of gigantic craters in the road as you drive, disruptions, things that attest to the uncontrollability of the world around you. So this is frost heave. Below the highway, there is water, frozen tumor, convex like a lens, blink, and it has collapsed back on itself. A trench rigid enough to swallow bear or deer wandering, drunk on early warmth. They've cleared the carcass away, leaving only a wide river stain of blood. From a distance speeding, it looks like a mountain, something to catch fire, speak a revelation, tell us why things stay broken, shove with their cold shoulders until the smooth guardrails of our futures crack, force us to change lanes. Boy, the silence in the middle is a little strange, isn't it? So weird. It's beautiful because you can get lost in your own head, but it's a little bizarre because you feel like you're speaking into a vacuum. One of the other poems that I was driven to read tonight came from watching the visitors pop up on the Zoom. And all of a sudden, I noticed popping up some very dear friends, all of whom who have a love affair with paper. I have a very dear friend sitting out there named Joanne who makes amazing marbleized papers. And Lori is out there who laid out and designed so many, all of the Littoral books and so many other just amazing projects. And I was reminded of this poem that snuck its way into my collection because I'm the daughter of graphic designers, and I spent my childhood surrounded by trays of sample papers, and they had a printing press for a while, like a good old-fashioned, old-school offset printing press sitting in their garage. And as a kid, I was fascinated. You know, I used to watch them ink the press and the press move and produce these beautiful pages, which gave rise to a poem called Offset, the first part set in my own memories, and the second part in a journey I took with my son. Offset. After school, I fell in love with paper. Office bound, my sister and I, our favorite game to study weight, weave, fiber, the boundary between beige and bone, cream, wheat, ecru, hints of color, treasure. I favored recycled grays, loved how the ghosts of old boxes would resurrect to touch. We wrote our best poems remnant, unsteady cursive kerning for precision, permanent solid like a lasered plate, the offset press rocking with such force ink would spill over the rollers, flood pages with wild reefs of color, falling from the register like wings drying on the concrete trembling, a fragile backward sound. Cool gray boots, processed blue shadows, my son and I on the winter trail, snow heavy in the wet air, he asks me, where the black raspberry, blueberry, where the bright-faced marigold, birdhouse swinging empty on the leaning hemlock tree. I tell him, all things wait for summer. Blank pages of snowy fields glossy, color ready, longing for watermark, pressure, signature heat. So before I move to my final poem, just because books aren't static and writers keep writing, I wanted to share with you something that's not in Mast year. My project to get through the pandemic was to write one poem a day during our most intense period of lockdown, to kind of keep a poetic record of some of the experiences we had during this strange and unsettled time. And I wanted to share with you this one because you can't make this stuff up. The way in which we connected with my parents through the pandemic was by having my mother and father Zoom in and share stories with my children. My children are ages, now they both had birthdays, 11 and 7. They were 10 and 6. And in the weird way that children do, they decided they wanted to hear a children's version of Hamlet for their story one night. which struck me as the most completely crazy choice in the whole world for ages 10 and 6. But as you'll see, it wasn't so crazy after all. So this poem is called My Children Choose Tragedy. My children choose tragedy as their bedtime story. On the laptop, my mother has Skyped in William Shakespeare for Children, edited edition. Primary as the choice she gives them, spoiled for comedy. So when they pick Hamlet, we are both surprised. Tragedy is sad, I say. We know, my son tells me in his night sky pajamas. Shakespeare sounds fun, my daughter counters, winding the braid of her hair like an heiress around the room of her hands. To my delight, they are breathless. Frozen by the ghostly stare, Elsinore battlements, murder most foul, both agree Hamlet's a whiner, and I, grateful that they edited Ophelia, still feel a pang when he sends her discreetly away. Children's editions are light in ambiguity, so Hamlet pretends. He loves, he obeys, enough for heroism. Still, everyone is delighted when he skewers Polonius, pirates, and a duel. My husband and I acted out with wooden spoons as my mother reads, children howling when I am slain, twitching on the den rug, eyes on the carefully locked front door. Do I tell them of the time I saw it live? At the Barbican, cemented, brutal, all the golden threads of my life, 5 rows from the stage, they were everyone mine. Hamlet, Claudius, every word, and though I knew them all, I wept, as if I had suddenly become aware that all things die. So I can't read to you poems from a book called Mast Year without telling you what a mast year is. In case you've never heard of this strange New England term, it's used to refer to a global phenomenon involving oak trees. And what happens is, for some completely unaccountable reason, all of the oak trees in a region will decide to overproduce. It doesn't happen every year. It happens on no discernible schedule. But all of a sudden, all of the oak trees, I think it's like triple their standard production of acorns. And this sets off a crazy chain reaction. More acorns mean more squirrels mean more predators that eat the squirrels. So it filters all the way through the food chain and the food web. An amazing, unknown phenomenon of abundance. And when I came to write this book after poetry just rose up in my life in a way that was abundant and unaccountable and unimaginable, thanks to Balancing Act 2, and the just tremendous effect that that had, not only on my life, but upon the lives of so many women poets here in Maine. I felt as if it was a mast year in my own soul, just as it was a mast year happening outside. So the title of my collection and its closing poem, Mast Year. Acorns, we hold one thing inside another. Selves we have put to rest. Treasures we gather. Antler, feather, black mica, sacred stone. Now the world wakes. Sail-tailed squirrels arc circles in the median, an orgy of population, acorn explosion, everywhere fruiting. You plant them in the sandbox, under the swing, seed, all desert's grove. So bodies pile up their fatness and their hoard. So the sun dips below the oak tree, the one that bends over my garden. I track its shadow, trying to absolve it from blame. But we are all guilty, it seems, of taking advantage of abundance. The warm spring calls the flower brings the fruit falls, a carpet of sweetness on the pine needles, on the dust dirt road, and we all scurry to taste. Wise crow waiting, rats flooding the yellow field, even our unlucky bodies belly full, even our oldest trees shake forth life, root whispering, feathery hand on feathery hand. Now is our time.
Thank you so much, Katherine. Yes, and I see some of you engaging with this. There is a reactions feature in Zoom. It gives you the options of 2 emojis. You can clap or you can give the thumbs up, and that's available in the bottom toolbar if you are on the desktop view of Zoom. So thank you, Katherine. Your readings made me think of 2 things. One is the incredible content that the Folger Shakespeare Library has been putting out during the pandemic and making many of their resources available, and some fabulous live productions that are wonderful. It made me think of that reading. But then also I'm so appreciative of your poem Mast Year, because when I think back to last year, the imagery that is seared in my mind is all of the poor squirrels on the side of the road. Driving on Route 9 in between Wells and the Berwicks was just horrific for many weeks. So thank you for the new imagery that I will sear into my mind with regards to the past year. So thank you again. We just heard from Katherine Hagopianberry and some works, some new poems, and also poems from her latest publication, Mast Year. There is a link to that in the chat. Be sure to check it out and purchase a copy. It's another beautiful production from Littoral Books. I will remind you, if you have questions for either of our 2 readers who have already spoken and shared their work, to drop those into the chat or at any point during the evening. Okay, so on deck now is Joshua Bodwell. Joshua is the editorial director of David R. Godine Publisher and Black Sparrow Press. He served as the executive director of the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance for nearly a decade. He has also been a regular contributor to Poets and Writers magazine and is a contributing editor at the online journal Fiction Writers Review. Joshua's work also appears in the Littoral Books North by Northeast, new short fiction by writers from Maine and New England. So welcome, Joshua.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. You were going to say something else.
Oh, no, I can, but...
No. I thought you were going to say hi back or something.
For a while.
Sorry, you can tell I've been editing a manuscript all day, not talking to people, so...
Yeah.
Forgive me. I'm still in my head a little bit. Thank you so much. And hi to Agnes and Jim. I can see you guys over in the sidebar. Miss you too. So like many of you, I've been swearing a lot every day. So I thought I would continue that and read the beginning of a story that has a bunch of swears in it, but is ultimately about misunderstanding one another. So it's called You Can Take It or Not. Samuel Pierce is lying on his sofa reading the newspaper when he hears a man shouting outside, the voice loosened by alcohol. He hears a woman shriek, then the dull thud of flesh on flesh. Samuel rises from the sofa and pulls aside the thin curtain. It is noon on Sunday, and an icy snow has begun to fall. Samuel can see at the gray gull's back door a broad-shouldered man with a gut bulging over his jeans, waving his hands in the face of a brown-haired woman. She winces and recoils. Samuel's small apartment and the bar, a low-ceilinged local haunt, hover on the pier above the roiling Atlantic and are separated only by a narrow wooden plank alley. The man yells again and pushes his face into the woman's face. She steps backward clumsily, skidding on the icy ground. A cloud of breath pours from the man's mouth as he raises his arm and brings down an open palm hard across the woman's face. Hey, stop that! Before Samuel realizes what he is doing, he is at his door, throwing it open and shouting, "Get away from her, stop!" He freezes on the threshold, one arm raised. The man turns from the woman and his glassy eyes strain to focus on Samuel. His face is fleshy, his droopy cowboy-style mustache unkempt. Samuel has lived in town all his life, but never seen this man before. "You want to fight me, bitch?" the drunk asks. "Huh, bitch?" He wears a stained navy blue sweatshirt with Key West printed across the chest in faded white letters. The man stumbles toward Samuel, who hasn't loosened his grip on the doorknob. Samuel tenses. The wind blows and bits of snow cling to his socks. The drunk shouts, "I'm gonna knock you out, you little bitch." At 6 feet tall, Samuel is hardly small, but this stumpy man looks powerful, thick-armed, and barrel-chested. The man concentrates on each exaggerated step as he shuffles tentatively across the crusty ice. "Come on," says the woman, "don't." The man stops and looks at her. "Don't," she says again, "let's go." Her tone is less pleading than annoyed. But the man continues on this lumbersome trajectory toward Samuel. "Come on, bitch," he says again. The drunkard's eyes reveal more stupidity than rage, and in this realization, Samuel feels a surprising clarity. "No," he says, "I don't want to fight you. I want you to stop hitting that woman." He doesn't raise his voice, but he doesn't attempt to hide his disgust either. "Fuck you," the man grunts. He seems to notice for the first time the small but icy snow mound between him and Samuel. He stares hard as though calculating a route to Samuel's throat. "Mind your business," the woman snaps at Samuel. It is the first thing she has said to him. Her face looks pinched, mean, and this makes Samuel suddenly and inexplicably angry. For the first time since he threw the door wide open, Samuel realizes he has no idea what he thought he could do. "I'm calling the cops," he yells. He slams the door, throws the bolt, and grabs the phone from his desk. As the line rings, he pulls aside the curtain again and watches the man stumble toward the parking lot and bellow, "Give me the fucking car keys." The woman stands facing the gull's back door, but doesn't go inside. Her long, fine brown hair blows wildly in the wind. Samuel watches until she turns and looks at him peering out his window. It startles him, and he drops the curtain.
Oh, that was fabulous. Thank you. And again, if you want to participate, use those emoji icons. Thank you so much, Joshua. I love hearing swear words. It's really, really cathartic. I like using them too. I won't, my aunt is on this call and I won't out her granddaughter and my cousin who we often share some swear, some cathartic swearing. Oh, I just outed us. Anyway, a reminder, we're gonna get back to business now. A reminder to pop your questions for Meghan, Katherine, Joshua in the chat. I'll be reading those and connecting them to the appropriate authors or all of them when our time comes. Again, there are several links to the Godine publishers in the chat, as well as North by Northeast. So be sure to check out those works. We're really hooking you up with a lot of links. So hopefully you have an internet tab open and you've just got a lot of different tabs related to literal works and the websites of our readers tonight. Again, that Q&A session will be coming up after our next reader. And our final reader for the evening is Jefferson Novicki. He is the author of the story collection, The Paper Coast, and the novel, The Book of Transparencies. His work has appeared in Smokelong Quarterly, Electric Literature, Fairy Tale Review, and Beloit Poetry Journal. He is the archivist for the Maine Women Writers Collection, which is where our professional lives have intersected in the past, which has been such a pleasure. And he also teaches English at the Southern Maine Community College. Winner of the 2019 Maine Postmark Poetry Contest and the 2020 Maine Literary Award in Short Works Poetry, he lives with his wife and his dog in Freeport, Maine. Welcome, Jefferson, and congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Marieke. Thanks, everybody, for coming and listening. I'm going to read a couple poems from Dangerous New World, very beautiful book. Main Voices on the Climate Crisis. The first poem is called The Climate Change Activist Attends a Fundraiser, and it's one of those titles that tells you exactly what is going on in the poem. No trickery in this title at all. It was written after I went to a fundraiser at the Maine Beer Company, which is in Freeport, which turned out to be a very good place for climate change anxiety when you pair it with beer and pizza. So some combination of beer and pizza and climate change resulted in this poem. The climate change activist attends a fundraiser. She wanted to live in town, but found a house seaside village. She's run the numbers. The 9-foot sea level rise won't get to her, but the storms. She knows she should sell soon, but her kids love the playset in the backyard. What gets to her? Never mind. She doesn't let it show. Has to drive to work, didn't want to get 2 cars, but had to do it. Another small failure, and life full of them. Nobody's keeping score but her and the earth and the oil and her children, the way her son says, I need a push, Mama, push me. I'm gonna pump my legs. You push me. You be quiet, Mama. I'm gonna do a sonnet. The change activist hates indoor fountains. Enough said. She's finishing her PhD thesis on how to depress the shit out of everyone instantly. She sees them deflate right before her eyes. It's kind of my superpower, she thinks, tries to make a joke out of it. Something funny in nihilism, something like a poet who finds it hard to speak. Something about giving up today and tomorrow, getting up and going to work. Drink coffee, wine, water, 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 water. What gets to her? She wants to know who it was that took away love as the force that would save us from a world gone mad. She hopes it wasn't her own doing, all of it, but she has a sinking feeling. Love is what gets to her. How it's its own thing, not enough, too much, wedged into her heart. What they don't know when they look at her and she watches them deflate, love is the reason she does it. Thank you. And then I just have one more poem. It's called The Boomin Birds. It's an example of cli-fi, or I think it's an example of cli-fi. I'm not sure if it's officially example. And if you're not familiar with that term, that's climate change mashed up with science fiction. And it's a poem that is it's really it's an example of people responding to crisis and making the best out of a strange situation, which of course we have all been dealing with COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter. So a lot of things have been thrown at us that we've had to respond to. And this is also, I mean, the last thing is a very long introduction for a relatively short poem. Sometimes I like to think about soundtracks in the back of poems, like if there's going to be music going on in the back of a poem. This would be kind of a mashup between something like Mad Max or Godzilla, or if you know Black Mirror, or some kind of sci-fi thing, and you mash that up with the Golden Girls or On Golden Pond or something like that. It's called The Boomin Birds. 1. We found ourselves after the flood in the bird business, which boomed like nobody's business. Nobody quite knew why birds came through better than any other animal, but they did. Birds became the new dogs, the new kids, the new clouds. They littered the sky, but no one could argue about the opportunities they offered. It was a whole new world. 2. We put up the platform above the trees, gave up the house and moved up there for good. Rob was good with his hands, and I cultivated my feather brain, became one with the birds. Below there would soon be too much water anyway. Rob peed off the edge of the platform vertiginous. 3. It was the bigger birds that boomed, eagles and albatrosses and a new thing like a pterodactyl, but uglier. To be revolutionary, you have to be a little bit stupid, be a cross between an air traffic controller and a Pied Piper, a flying feather singer. Once they landed, Rob trapped them and I whacked. 4. To survive on birds alone is to eat hollow bones, a house whose home is just air once you get through the hair wall and crunch down to the core, barely enough wind there to keep the doors open, barely enough sing to survive. We need a bunch of souls to sustain one soul in this wild world, above the water and beneath the blue, stuck up in the air, fishing for wings. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jefferson. I love the idea of soundtracking a poem or any writing. And for some reason, the booming birds made me think that these are the bizarre pieces. I mean, you have this as well, working in an archive of the random pieces of trivia that stick in your mind. But the very last heath hen before extinction was named Booming Ben. And one more final note is that I distinctly recall sitting on my couch reading through your poem and laughing out loud at the line about the PhD depressing the shit out of everyone. So thank you for that. So we have just heard from Meghan Sterling, Katherine Hagopianberry, Joshua Bodwell, and Jefferson Novicki, all writers represented in books published by Littoral Books. Thanks so much to each of you for sharing your work with us this evening. This has truly been a wonderful program, an evening of language, and we hope it has been inspiring, nurturing, and fulfilling for you, our listeners. So please feel free to, I think we've disabled your ability to unmute yourself. So if you have a question, please drop it into the chat and either myself or the producer will field it over to me and we'll ask the readers to respond. But perhaps by way of just a quick review, would each of our authors this evening just share the titles, if there are those, for the works that you read? Maybe starting with Meghan?
Sure. The 4 poems that I've read were What Emerges, followed by Still Life with Snow, followed by Adeline, and the last one was Weaning.
Thank you.
So I read Frost Heave, followed by Offset, followed by My Children Choose Tragedy, followed by Mast Year.
And I read from the beginning of a story titled You Can Take It or Not.
I read 2 poems, The Climate Change Activist Attends Fundraiser and The Boomin Birds.
Great. A lot of fabulous words to take in. So again, we'll give you another moment to consider your questions. But I have a couple lined up here, obviously. I would be a terrible host if I didn't have things ready to ask. Okay, this is, as a lifelong Mainer, I'm continually fascinated by the intricacies of connections that exist here and spread their tentacles out. So I was wondering if you would briefly indulge us in hearing about how you got connected to Littoral Books, or how you came to find yourself here this evening.
Would you like me to start?
Go ahead, that would be great.
Okay. I moved to Maine with my Mainer husband and our little tiny munchkin in August of 2018 to the Rosemont neighborhood. And I went to Rosemont Market to pick up some sundries, and there was a flyer on the wall asking for women writers, women poets to submit their work to an upcoming publication. And it said, because of course it said, Maine authors, and I had literally been there for a few days, and I checked the fine print and it said, could be a recent transplant. And I said, well, I'm a recent transplant, but I do have a mailing address, so I'm doing it. And so I sent my poems in, and they were accepted, and that was it. I have a strong relationship with the wonderful Agnes and Jim, who have done so much for Maine writing and supporting us, and they've just been wonderful to work with, continue to be wonderful to work with, and I'm so grateful to be part of the Littoral Books community.
Thank you, Meghan. We can continue to go in the order in which you presented, or I can call on you, whichever you prefer.
I can jump in. I didn't want to step on anybody's toes. So for me, I came to Maine in 2011 with a story much like Meghan's. My husband was the Mainer for like generations of Mainers, and I was the wife from away. And we came when our daughter Sophia was 2, before our son was a glint in our eyes. And I came finishing my PhD dissertation on how liminal and paradoxical spaces, the littoral zone being one of those spaces, can promote women's empowerment through communication and voice. And in the best tradition of PhD scholarship, that pretty much served me. So when this notice showed up on Maine Writers and Publishers from Littoral Books saying, we're looking for women poets, and I had been writing poetry ever since I graduated college, but had been too afraid, really. Like, I had been writing and writing and writing, but I was an academic, and so I would produce academic work, right? I was like, well, I'm telling myself, this is where it should be. So I sent the poems in, and Agnes and Jim and Marcia and Kathy and Bonnie took them in, and that was my first book publication, and it's been astounding ever since. I could talk for 10 hours, so I'm not, but my gratitude is unspeakable.
Thank you.
So I attended the 35th anniversary of the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance just as a civilian, I guess. And then when it came time to prepare to celebrate the 40th anniversary, I was in charge. And what I had noticed at the 35th was a real lack of celebration of the past and the founding and the founders. So in preparation for the 40th, I went looking for who was left in Maine. And that boiled down to the poet Lee Sharkey and to Agnes, who was a bit harder to find, I must say. Lee I already knew pretty well. Agnes, I think, had left Mecca at this point, and that was like the main email I could find for her, and it took some doing. And eventually I found her, and now she's listening. I have to be careful. I don't know if she knew what to make of me as I was tracking her down to do this. And then I'm happy to say we became, in my opinion, fast friends, Aunt Agnes. And those two we really feted at the 40th anniversary of the MWPA, which they mothered and birthed on my birthday, which was so funny, June 9th, 1975. So that was how I got to know Agnes more closely. And then we just kept, Lee, Agnes and I just kept getting together for coffee and lunch after that 40th anniversary. And so I feel like I got to hear kind of early stages as she and Jim were starting to dream and reimagining launching Littoral Books. So when when she said they were going to put together a short story anthology, she asked me to submit. That's how I find myself here.
Awesome. Thank you.
I was trying to think about how I heard about literal books too, and I think it's from my boss at the Maine Women Writers Collection, Kathleen Miller. I think she mentioned to me Balancing Act, and we got a copy of the book, and then we went to a few of the readings, which were real happenings. Like, they were really fun events and really well attended. And I think I went to 2 or 3. One was at UNE, which was a particularly fun one. And since then, it was the press has just been on my radar, and I just keep following everything that they do.
Awesome. And a note that Kathleen Miller's work is also represented in A Dangerous New World as well. So be sure to check that out if you haven't already. Okay, let's see. So again, we have a few more minutes together. I have one more question, but if you have questions, please drop them into the chat. One of the things, I'm now working from home and not really leaving my home or my yard very often. And I was in sort of the anticipation of beginning to work from home and having more time. I was getting so excited about all the reading that I was going to get done. And then I found myself like completely unable to open a book despite the piles of them, which might have something to do with the fact that most of the books that I had checked out from the library or had recently purchased were all about the apocalypse. Like I think it's a McSweeney title that's like 100 Apocalypses and Other Apocalypses that was on my pile to read, which was like maybe not the best selection for this moment. This is a long intro to which I'm going to ask all of you, what have you been reading lately? And have you been reading? And has this world that we're currently in ourselves like affected what and the way that you read? Oh, that's like turned into a big question. So feel free to jump in or not.
I just finished this book. It's called The Sacred Depths of Nature. So the tremendous anxiety of this time, at first, when it first happened, I couldn't read anything except for I read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind before bed, because it would help calm me down. But I was unable to read things for a little while there. But then I started, because you start to normalize and things started to fall into their own weird little place. And so I started to read again, and I've been reading quite a lot, novels and things. But my husband and I both have decided to use this time as one to sort of really look inward and get clearer about sort of our own sort of spiritual understanding. He and I are both secular Jews, and sort of have struggled with like God, like, no, that doesn't feel right. What feels right? Nothing feels right. That language doesn't feel right. Anyway, so this was this amazing book by this woman named Ursula Goodenough, which, is that a great name? That's a great name.
Yeah.
And she's a microbiologist and an exquisite writer, and she weaves together like cellular biology and this profound spiritual naturalism, this sense of wonder and awe and beauty, all at the same time, in a way that just blew me. It just knocked my socks off. I love this book. I'm like, I just finished it, but I want to start over like right now. It's one of those books.
Amazing.
So that was really, this has been very positive read.
Would you drop the title and the author into the chat for us?
I'd be thrilled.
Thank you.
So if you had asked me that question when it all shook down in March, for about 2 or 3 weeks, I just couldn't read anything. And then Gary Lawless, a tremendous Maine poet, sent me, because he knew I loved HD, he sent me a chapbook, a really late chapbook of hers called Hermetic Definitions. It was her last chapbook, which came off of a small press run that Gary Snyder did, which is crazy. And so I opened this up and I find But she who draws the veil aside, unbinds my eyes, commands, write, write or die. And I was like, I'm kind of feeling that way. And for some weird reason, like moving through this chapbook, and I was writing a lot, but just not reading. I was like, it's time to read again. And then I started. So I took some time and finally turned to Ocean Vuong's like amazing book, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, which every syllable of it was a revelation. I read a couple of, fun light fiction. I read The Starless Sea, and then given recent events, I turned to Ibram X. Kendi's Stamped from the Beginning, which I'm about halfway through, and it's stunning. So that's where I am now.
Great. If you want to pop those titles in the chat, that would be.
Oh my goodness.
Or one of them, whatever. We're coming up on time, Jefferson or Joshua. Do you have any quick?
Oh, I have
I've
quick
been
one.
doing this little weird thing where I've been rereading every morning.
Ooh.
Yeah, it feels like I can dip in and out of things. So it
Yeah.
could be a single poem, it could be a short story, it could be the chapter of a novel, anything in between. But it's been kind of comforting and a reason to revisit the stacks.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I have two poetry books that I've been loving. One, Wanda Coleman, Wiccan Enchantments from Black Sparrow, is an amazing, amazing book. It's like poetry. And also Museum of Small Bones by Miho Nanaka from Ashland Poetry Press. Both really, really good.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, we are just about at time. We have a few more orders of business, so stay with us for just a moment. Thank you again to our speakers, Meghan Sterling, Katherine Hagopianberry, Joshua Bodwell, and Jefferson Novicki. I also want to send a hearty shout out and thank you to our producer, Robert Diamante, and to Jim and Agnes Bouchel for their incredible vision with Littoral Books. Please be sure to visit the Littoral Books website to explore all of their fabulous offerings. And also, mark your calendars. Join us next week, same time, same place, Tuesday, June 17th at 7 p.m. We'll be hosting a Balancing Act 2 Slam, and we'll be featuring the words and voices of Georgie Hunt, Rebecca Irene, Linda Aldrich, Emily Tupper Matthews, Shayna Genray, Anna Turner, Jerry Terrell, and Laura Bonzanelli. And my apologies, despite the fact that I have a very challenging to pronounce name. I am terrible at pronouncing names, so forgive me if I have mispronounced your name. And finally, I just want to thank all of you so very much for joining us. I don't know about you. I often feel a little Zoom fatigue, but I've found coming together to listen to poetry and to prose and to literature has been completely rejuvenating. So it really has been a pleasure to share this virtual space with you, and I wish you health and happiness and lots of good books, whether you're rereading something on your shelf or engaging with new works. And so until next time, I am Marieke van der Steenhoven, and it has truly been a pleasure to be your host for this, the very first in a series called Littorally Alive. So thank you, and hopefully we will see you next week.